Hey, Abeer. So I thought today we could talk a little bit more about our journey and how and why we became archetypal astrologers. So, yeah, maybe you can just start, share a little bit about what has brought you to this moment in life.
Yeah. So you mean like how did I find archetypal astrology? When you say this moment, you're referring to like
Well, yes, this moment in terms of where you are with building Numinous Realm, how you got to this point.
yeah. Okay. Well, that's bigger than archetypal astrology.
Sure.
Um I think really for me, apart from like my personal I guess interests growing up, I'd say the big catalyst was 2008 financial recession, the Great Recession. I was a college student, undergrad at NYU Stern, studying finance during the greatest meltdown in Wall Street, probably since 1929. And I was pretty much on path to join a large bank as, an investment banker or a management consultant. That was my dream coming into undergrad. And when the world economy melted down and I saw a lot of protests on the street, and not too many answers within the academy that I was in about what was happening, why were people so angry. It's triggered a philosophical opening. I think a spiritual opening was happening around the same time. Also, I think a relationship I had at the time with somebody who was not in business at all, but was more in social work, was her major. That I think was just part of this gestalt, I think, that opened me into social enterprise. So I saw social enterprise as something that I could do business, but it seemed like there was a social component to it, which seemed like very important given how upset society seemed at business. And so that drew me into Grameen America, where I did an internship. I was fairly disillusioned at the time and kind of a bit of a bohemian. So it's, I didn't do the best in that internship. I would say, I could have definitely done better, but it was a very inspiring moment for me to be there in this bank that Muhammad Yunus started and to be around these other ex investment bankers and just sort of seeing how business could be applied to more than that sort of stuff. When I graduated, I reneged on a job at JP Morgan. I had a role in corporate finance there, to instead go to a village in South India, working with a great entrepreneur in India who had retired, Sudarshan Maini. He created the world's first mass produced electric vehicle, the Reva car. And he had retired and he was wanting to bring a kind of Gandhian, Mohandas Gandhian kind of philosophy to the villages of self sufficiency. So I remember it was my happiest day when I told JP Morgan, sorry, I'm not going to take this job offer. Or in fact, I had taken it, but I'm reneging this and I'm flying to Bangalore to just join this guy. I had no clue what was next. And, within 2 weeks, he had sent me packing off to work with one of India's great organic farmers, Vivek Karyappa. I was there for about a week carrying, cow dung, shoveling, cow sheds and working in the fields. And then after 1 week of that, I was in the village. They just basically dropped me off in the middle of the tiniest village you can imagine. I had my suitcase from the airport there, and it was raining, and no one spoke any English or Hindi, except for the guy. One guy who had accompanied me was just speaking a very little amount of it. And I was out there doing social enterprise, and that meant a lot to me to be in the village, in the middle of nowhere. To me, it was middle of nowhere, coming from Manhattan village to Machur, but I had a chance to build a library out there. So I basically had a hut, you could say, in this Rajiv Gandhi National Forest. It's a tiger preserve. And thanks to some villagers there, they built me shelves. So I brought a lot of books from Bangalore when I would visit back in. And I was studying 18th century, 19th century revolutionaries. I was very interested in the post Napoleonic era. There was a lot of Enlightenment, Hegelianism. That sort of stuff really drew me in. I was also reading about Mandela, reading Gandhi's book. All this revolutionary vibe was coming alive in me. And I think it was part of the Great Recession, the revolutionary feeling on the streets, the sense that I was in business, but there was more to it. And after 1 year in the village, I grew profoundly through that experience, thanks to the mentors I had. Maini Karyappa, another Ganesh Shanoy was a veteran community organizer in India's villages. He was one of the core organizers of Ekal Vidyalaya, which was bringing education to all these villages in India. So those were formative mentors coming out of this very prim proper business school, and I could have ended up at a Deloitte or a JP Morgan or something like that. So after a year of that, I wanted to understand the internet and got into sort of freelancing for marketing, branding, moved to San Francisco, then moved to Bombay, started like consulting for different companies around Asia, America. But still, I just felt like there was an artist trying to be born within me. That is, and I know it sounds like such a privilege to be like, there was this artist trying to come through. But I remember being in Bangalore for the first time, because on every couple of weeks I'd go back to the city and hang out with the young people there, whoever friends I made, because there was no friends I had. I mean, I had friends in the village, but they didn't really. They were from such a different background. So I saw Midnight in Paris, and I think that that movie really transformed me profoundly. If you never, I know you've seen it, but this guy has a very traditional relationship, and he's looking for something more creative in his life, and he wants to roam in the rain in Paris, and he goes back through history and sees all these, people from that era that really inspires him to be a creative writer. So that movie sparked something in me. I was like, it's Woody Allen, I guess, that I
Yes.
want to be more creative. And so I moved back in with my parents. I was also at the time struggling with what I later realized was alcoholism. I didn't know it at the time because I just thought I was a bohemian guy, but really I had gotten a bit stuck. And so as I was going into 12-step communities, learning a lot about myself, about integrity, uh, moral uh, behavior, and I mean that in a very personal way, because 12 step is all about one's personal journey. um, I started writing, and so I was writing about some story related. This is Midnight in Paris vibe, some story about uh, caveman times and how farming was discovered by the first person who took a dump somewhere, and then they all went back, and somehow plants were growing. It's very funny now I look back, because that was during the Uranus Pluto world transit, so it was a very Uranus Pluto story that was coming out. I didn't know it at the time, but it was very hard going writing the fiction. But I started writing about psychology, and not like I was some trained psychologist, but just I wanted to write. I was going through 12 step, reading Eckhart Tolle, and I was just wanting to share and help with people what I was kind of learning about myself, about the addictive part of myself and a higher power and all this. And so about 80,000 words came out over a summer or so that I was writing. And that inspired me, thanks to my friend from NYU, who was very into positive psychology on the East Coast. She told me about CIIS. And so I went there. I was going to go there for a psychology program, but instead I found the PCC department, Philosophy, Cosmology, Consciousness. And it was really the website that drew me in, because they were talking about this world revolutionary, revisioning humanity's role in the cosmos and all this. And that was very suitable for me, given how I was coming into it.
Mm.
So I came to PCC program, very interested in Brian Swim's work, because, by the way, Carl Sagan was one of the great figures. Carl Sagan, Joseph Campbell. My senior year at NYU, as I was deciding that I needed more in life than just being at JP Morgan corporate finance, these were some of the mentors that kind of came into my world. And so Brian Swim seemed like a Carl Sagan-esque, cosmologist, scientist, bringing a sense of poetry. So he really drew me at first, but then I discovered Rick as well. I
Mm.
knew nothing about him. He seemed like a very serious kind of guy, and but I took a class that he and Brian were teaching together, and slowly Rick started sharing about his work relating to astrology, which seemed like very stupid, very. I didn't think that he was stupid, but it just astrology seemed like very weak,
Yeah.
very loose, very irrelevant to this kind of revolutionary financial Marxist kind of Napoleonic, thing that was in me. I mean, I'm just sharing like what was this person in me, this revolution. Like I used to love Asian Dub Foundation, this band from the UK that's all about revolution. So astrology, I was like, that seems so esoteric. It doesn't seem like a revolutionary thing. But the more I started to look into his research, I realized that he was right. Actually, it was a mix of introspection with just a sense of time passing where I could look at what transits were supposed to be happening in the world, because that's what Rick does. He strips down astrology to its basics of just the angular alignment of the planets. um, and then he also focuses on world history as this sort of neutral canvas. Like if I tell you that I'm going through a Jupiter transit, it's hard for you to really know what's happening inside me personally. But if we look at the world and we can see during a Uranus Pluto, this is what happened in 2010s, this is what happened in the 1960s, this is what happened in the 1930s, this is what happened in the 1900s. There's a lot of focus and attention on world history. There's a lot of news, people, reflections, and so world history became what in my view was this neutral area, that I could start to see through my own experience starting from 2014-15 onwards how the world transits were showing up. And so through this introspection, this research, learning more about Rick's work, and his collaboration with Stan Groff, one of the great psychiatrists of the 20th century, who was also a professor at the PCC program. I was like, holy cow, like this is real. And if this is real, mashing that, remixing that with my exposure in business world, I guess, as an undergrad and as a consultant, freelance consultant, I was like, this is going to change everything. This is really the biggest discovery of our time. The fact that there is any kind of credible relationship between angular planetary thing in space and human psychology, I was like, this is going to change everything. And I think being somebody who was anti capitalist for a while, but now in PCC, which was extremely left wing progressive community, according to me, I became a defender of capitalism. So I'm somebody who's really tried to hold the virtue and the shadow of commerce and art. I spent some time as a painter, so I got a bit of understanding of art, of commerce, and also philosophy. And so I think all of those coming together with what, in my view, is this scientific discovery by Rick, supported by Stan Groff, Richard Tarnas and Stan Groff, that there is this correlation between macro psychology, of which all individuals are a part of, and this angular relationship of the planets. In my view, it's a renaissance. Like when we talk about the Renaissance, they were discovering knowledge that was 1,000 years old, but with a new context. And that's kind of what's happening is after the Enlightenment and scientific materialism, which has been amazing for all of us, we love it, we've reached a dead end. And I do believe that my alcoholism was part of that dead end, of feeling like there's more to life than just material things. There's this emotional, psychological being here that's not really being addressed outside of religion, but religion seemed not so credible because, for whatever reason, to me, right, spirituality did. So I think that's a lot of the different threads, intellectual, personal, creative, that and brought me to this moment here of taking an interest in archetypal astrology and also trying to connect it to a larger world through what we're doing at Numinous Realm, while honoring capitalism's light as well as, you know trying to be cognizant of its potential shadow, and at the end of the day just making something really cool. I think that's where it all comes down. It's like
Yeah.
we can talk all intellectually, but just making something cool that moves people. I think that's the artist in me,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to create. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. It does seem like all those moments in your life, um, you know, culminated um, in this sort of integration, maybe you can call it, of archetypal cosmology, and taking it beyond what it is, like your whole sense of what the role capitalism plays, the role that commerce plays, is like now an integration of what Richard Tarnas, and others at the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program have nurtured. And even Rick himself has said that commerce has been in the shadow of PCC, and so I think we both feel like there's a role here to play of sort of bridging that gap of what PCC has developed, which is extremely important and really is enabling modern human beings who have been nurtured in a more materialistic paradigm, and more so those who have been brought up in the Western world. I mean, we're both Indian, and maybe we can go into this, that India astrology has been part of the Indian matrix for a long, long time, and so one could argue that there's less of that materialism in India compared to here, but um, that's another side that maybe I can talk about now, which is that,
Sure.
and the sense of skepticism that I had when I came to PCC. I did not even know that astrology was being taught at PCC when I first applied. So I graduated from Northeastern University with a degree in philosophy, psychology, and criminology. And I was just hearing those three um, fields of study, you can understand that maybe I'm curious to understand the way the human mind works. And I got into criminology because I wanted to understand from from the perspective of the shadow. That's where I wanted to start. Like, why do people do the things that they do, especially those who do bad things? And so over time, while I was in my degree at Northeastern, I think it consumed me quite terribly, because I started to feel a lot of fear. I used to be quite nervous that people had a gun, that they were holding a gun, that I would get shot at. I actually really did deal with this kind of fear, and it never really went away. So I think I started to see that maybe this was not the path for me. Like, I wanted to go into counterterrorism or even criminal law, and I was very passionate about it. But yeah, I think it really did consume me in a way that was not healthy anymore. And so I started to divert. I deepened into philosophy at that point. I diverted from criminology to philosophy. And I was still interested in the mind. I wanted to understand, the way that consciousness works. I didn't really know what, I mean, I still don't know what is consciousness. I'm still continuing to ask that question. And especially as an astrologer, it's become even more interesting to sort of understand what is consciousness. So when one, I think this is the case for many people who study philosophy, that when you go into philosophy, you start to really encounter, like, the essence of the nature of reality. And so you start to look into physics, and especially like cosmology, theoretical physics. I had no math background whatsoever, so I would read physics books popular physics books, like books from Carlo Rovelli, who's one of my favorite physicists. And just really really trying to understand, like, what is going on here, and does what what is occurring in the universe, like, relate to what is happening in my mind. That is where I was at. And this is just as I was graduating from Northeastern University, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I knew that I knew that I wasn't going to get a job, because I hadn't figured that out just yet. Like, what would I get a job in? I knew I didn't want to be a psychologist, in the sense that I didn't want to be a therapist. What do you do with a philosophy degree, other than going and taking the next step, which is grad school? So that was set. Like, I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but I didn't know which grad program just yet. And so I had come across the California Institute of Integral Studies while I was doing an internship with Kiva, and this was part of the co-op program at Northeastern University. I, like you, was also very interested in social entrepreneurship. I mean, I come from an entrepreneurial family. It feels like it's been part of my bloodline in some sense. That I don't know why I never got into business. I didn't declare business as a major, because I had this other side to me, which was really curious about the way that the world worked. But over time, I realized, okay, this is probably not enough. My dad would always, sort of pester me in that sense of, like, what are you going to do with this? And so that entrepreneurial side opened up, and it opened up through social entrepreneurship, because I, you know, like most people during that time, you know, you wanted to sort of do something good with business. And so that was my first internship, was to work with Kiva, a microfinance platform. So, you know, similar to you in some sense, where you went to Grameen, I went to Kiva, which was more a San Francisco tech nonprofit company using microfinance to help entrepreneurs all around the world. And I was on the US team. And the office in downtown San Francisco was very close to CIS on Mission Street. Um, and so one day I was just, you know, I love going to events and talks. And so I was on Eventbrite, and there was this author who was talking about, who wrote a book on biomimicry. And I found that to be really interesting. So I attended the talk, which was in the lobby of CIIS. And when I got there, I saw all these pamphlets of all the programs, and just reminding you that at that time I was considering what I wanted to do in the future after I graduated. So I saw philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness, like right there. And it truly, it was quite an astounding moment, because I had never seen those three words together, and it was everything that I was searching for, and it was right there on this pamphlet. So I picked it up, and I felt so much joy inside of me. So I kept that, and that was in 2017. I was gonna graduate in 2018. So that was circulating in my consciousness at that point. And then once I graduated, I moved to San Francisco. I did another internship there with another nonprofit, you know, tech company. And then during that time, I decided to apply to PCC, because I knew that this was it. In fact, I was hesitating because there was a side of me that always felt like I had to go to some Ivy League school, or some, you know, really great institution. Uh, you know, this might just be because I wanted to make my parents proud. Or, you know, that sense that there's, you know, I think many of us can probably, you know, agree to the fact that there's this sort of pressure to be the best, to go to the best, and it finds its root in having to make your parents proud. So I was struggling. I thought, okay, I should go to UC San Diego. They have a good cognitive neuroscience psychology program there, and I had to study for the GRE. And I'm not the kind of person who really does well in these kind of tests. I'm just not built that way. And so I began studying for it, but you know, it hit me. I'm like, what are you doing? You know your heart's desire is this program, like the joy you felt when you saw it. So what are you doing? Like, why are you even considering applying to this other university and studying for it? And it was just it was quite a moment of revelation. And then I was pushed even further when I went and I sat in a class for PCC. This was before I even put my application in. I think I was emailing someone there, and they said you should just come in and sit in the class. And so I sat in Brian Swim's class, and he was really the person I think I was so lured in by, because he's a evolutionary cosmologist, and his background is in quantum gravity, I believe. So the way he was talking about the cosmos, and bringing his sort of theoretical insights in a very poetic, easy to digest way, but like his bringing in his own lens, was like it really blew my mind. And I knew that, okay, this is it, there's no other way around it. So that was it. That Brian and Carolyn, who were teaching that class that I sat in, um, you know it sealed um, it sealed it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the story. So I really had no idea that astrology was being taught. I didn't even know who Richard Tarnas was. I was just so lured in by Brian. and I was ready. I took a class. My first class was with him. That's where we met. Um, and then in the intro class that everyone has to take, like, you get to know all the professors who are there, and that's when Rick, came into one class and he talked about his work, and I just remember at that point I knew that he was the astrology guy, and you, when I met you and Aye, our other friend, were just talking about these planets. Like, you would look at something, you'd be like, oh, this is so Venus, Neptune, and this, and I had no idea what you were talking about, and I started to feel quite queasy. I was like, this is a bit not my thing. Like, I don't want to be in this new age, like, astrology stuff. Like, that's not what I came here for. I was so compelled by the more intellectual side of things, which obviously in the end I found out that this is the most intellectual of all, um, as well as the most creative. Um, but um, yeah, I think what I remember the most is that when Rick came in to teach that first class, I was so closed off. Like, I think I even remember, like, kind of like squinting at him a little bit, because I was just so I was such a skeptic. I had a really bad perception of this field of astrology, and the reason for that is because, you know um, I mean, Indian culture is so um, enamored by astrology, even outside of India. So, I mean, I never lived in India, but um, growing up in Singapore, my parents, consulted Vedic astrologers and whatnot, and so I think that I really saw the the medieval feeling come through Vedic astrology, which is that it wasn't just about who you are in this moment. It was and what your past was like. It was also this sense of putting a stamp on what the future was. Telling someone that, oh, you can't marry this person because you don't. I think they work on a point system when they look at compatibility, and they're like, oh, your points are not adding up to indicate that this is going to be a good marriage. And you know I I couldn't understand how this person who I had never met, who uh, had I've never even talked to on the phone, just has my date, my date of birth, and that's it, could indicate and dictate where my life had to go. I just couldn't grapple with that idea. And I cannot tell you the number of times I've gotten into arguments with Vedic astrologers. My mom brought a few over, and I would always challenge them. And I would challenge them from a place that was like, do you not believe in science? Like, what are you doing? Like, how can you say this? And it was like really tough. Once the guy really wanted to leave because he knew I was not going to give up, and he got so annoyed. He just wanted to get money from my mom to do some kind of prayer, and I just felt like there was something there that was not right. And I can also appreciate that there are not all Vedic astrologers are like that. I want to honor that fact, and not put the whole system down. But I can, from personal experience, I can say that it was extremely painful for me, to encounter these things, and that it induced fear. It really induced fear in not just me but people around me, like my family. I could see that there's this sense of knowing the future. Someone who tells you that they know your future, that evokes a sense of authority on the future, has so much power over you. And I was not going to give in to that. So that's where I was coming from when I came into PCC, and I encountered uh, astrology through you, through IA, through other students there, and then through Rick. I was just so blocked. But then it was going to Esalen Institute, which is a um, it's part of our retreat that PCC does. We go there with all the students, alumni, and the professors, and this is quite a special place. It's where Rick spent 10 years developing his ideas along with Stanislav Grof, and it's a beautiful place on the Northern California coast, on the cliffs. So you're very secluded from everything else, and just right in front of the Pacific Ocean. And of course, you can imagine the night sky is as beautiful as it can get. And so it was just 2 months into my program that you and I are also becoming closer as friends. And just hearing you and other people just mentioning the planetary archetypes, I'm not at that point, I didn't even know what they meant, but just hearing it, and there's like, it's a sense in which, yeah, you were all speaking a different language that I had no idea what the meaning of these words were. um, but there was a beauty to it, even though I was putting a block up. And I think the encounter with all of that circulating my consciousness, and feeling the depth that I was surrounded by in terms of conversation, philosophically, uh, as well as emotionally, and then to be under the night sky in a very clear night sky with just so many stars, and you can clearly see the Milky Way. I think something just dropped away from me in that moment. My skepticism did drop, and I think the mystery of it all, I was just so embraced by that
Yeah.
feeling, that I was like, okay, maybe I should look into this a little bit more. Maybe I should be a little bit more open to what you're saying, because I know you are so confident that I was going to come into it, that I was going to be able to see it so clearly, even though I had so much skepticism. And so that's when I started reading Cosmos and Psyche, and also starting to like listen to you, like working with you and seeing what you were doing, because you had already started working on Numinous Realm like a few years ago, but we became closer, and you were just showing me the work that you were doing, and I was reading Cosmos and Psyche at the same time. And as I was reading it, uh, the Saturn Pluto section, which is all about periods in history where there's a contraction in the macro psychology, whether it's through war or economic crisis or epidemics and pandemics. Uh, that is when COVID happened. And so it was quite a deep, deep, deep synchronicity. And I think I surrendered at that point. I knew that there was something larger than me. I had been told, I had seen a different side of astrology that I had not really that was not true in some sense. And here was a very honest, very compelling picture of and especially the mysterious nature of what the cosmos could be. And I felt a tremendous excitement to enter into this world, and that was my way into it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's interesting. I noticed like what gripped you first. Your first trail was a pamphlet
Yeah.
which had words on it.
Yeah.
And then what like turned you in a way was that psycho emotional experience of the stars and the aesthetic encounter of discussing these ideas with the Milky Way, you know?
Mm.
And that was not like, for me, it was a website that first, it was that feeling of this revolutionary website. And then what turned me was like looking into the research and seeing it for myself. So I think that's quite interesting for us as a creative team to have had, two paths into this project, which I think is very cool, because you did spend all summer writing a lot, which did touch quite a few people. And I am deep in, I did design the website for the news, and currently designing, for our community. So I just think it's interesting that we're trying to share with others, the breadcrumbs that led us into this transformation. And it's a transformation that you cannot buy, you cannot purchase. If you want to join the AI revolution, you sign up for ChatGPT. You want to join the social media revolution, you start posting on Instagram. These are material revolutions based on a material reductionism. You can just acquire it. But this is the Hegelian dialectic away from materialism. It's saying that all of that is amazing, but there's this other psychological, emotional stuff that is happening that anybody can see, but it cannot be accounted for in purely physics, Newtonian terms. And the only way to step into this new age is through the gates of your own perception. And I think that that is what makes this quite a luxury that anyone is able to access with, I think, the right guidance and support, and of course, their own individual journey of navigating from this reductionist worldview that we're all born into, more or less, through the descent of unknown and doubt and is
Yeah.
this crazy and nuts, and finding what's real and what's fake, and then coming out on the other side. Because what blows me away, as for you, was COVID, Saturn, Pluto, COVID. For me, this started in 2016, 2015, Uranus, Pluto. So I was in Uranus, Pluto, and I'm like, great, I've been exposed to this during a Uranus, Pluto, and now Saturn, Pluto is coming up. So let's see. Let's just wait and see if he's so right. We should start to see something conservative, something contract. And it was crazy when Trump won. That was very, very early. It wasn't even Saturn Pluto yet, but it was just, I was like, wow, there's a shift happening here. It was a populist Uranus Pluto quality, but there was the Saturn Pluto starting to come. Then as it deepened, politics got very divisive. There was an extreme intensification between the left, between the right, and I think, I don't know what year Seattle and all that happened,
Yeah.
but that was during Saturn Pluto.
With the George Floyd stuff. Yeah.
And George Floyd also was there, mixing this Uranus Pluto with the Saturn Pluto. And then COVID was the craziest, because I remember by then we were in a relationship. We had spent time traveling to Asia to meet your family. And I remember being at the airport, maybe in San Francisco, and realizing like this is the same airport, but it's just as if someone has taken a Saturn Pluto dial and turned it all the way up.
Yeah.
It's empty. It's like a tomb. It's very constricted. People are not able to travel the same way during 9/11, which was another major Saturn Pluto transit. It happened, right? And so I think that's what's crazy, is that we're literally just sitting here looking at the world, interpreting it through our own personal experience, as well as through the news media, which we're starting to produce now as well. And it's just crazy that it just keeps happening. It's like transit after transit, and we focus mainly on world transits, so we're looking at several months to several years. But given the 8 years or 9 years research foundations that our project now has, it's just literally crazy to see, without any plausible explanation why, that clearly there is a repetition of the previous psychological material. It's like you almost don't even know what to say about that.
Yeah.
It's not going to stop. It hasn't, like Rick's work shows how it's happened for centuries, and in my personal experience it's been happening for nearly a decade, and it seems as if it's not going to suddenly stop tomorrow, where for the past centuries it's happening. In my own 10 years it's happening, and it's like this is just going to keep happening.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what does it mean as people start to clue into it, and what kind of things can be created?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an important evolutionary junction in humanity's story, and of course something that is great needs an opposition in order for it to be sharpened. um, what is that saying, like every Jesus needs a Judas? Is that something along those lines, so I think that it's I hope that we will be alive um, when more like when a major shift begins to occur. Like, I don't know what that's going to look like. Maybe it's always meant to be a mystery school. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. It's interesting to consider like what this would look like. Did everyone during the Renaissance come to believe astrology was real. Um, that might be interesting to look into, and I wonder how fast that would happen. And of course, there's things to really consider here, in terms of the shadow of astrology, and what it has caught, what in what ways it has unfolded in the past, like during the medieval era. And I mean, there's a shadow to everything. So um, I think that the best way we think we can participate with this unfolding is to create with it.
Yeah.
And that's what Numinous Realm is about.
Yeah.
That's what we're here to do, is to sort of, the way that you just, as you said, that aesthetic encounter, that is what we want to bring to the world. Not everyone's going to be able to go to PCC, um, you know, and so how do we sort of, in a very Uranus Pluto way, which is the transit that is also unfolding right now until 2032, how can we bring it, how can we democratize access to archetypal cosmology? And so that is what Numinous Realm is doing, and we're very interested to do it in through the creative realm, um, through fashion, through art, through even just teaching the principles of the subject as well, so that others can go ahead and create with it as well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm less and less concerned these days about that one sudden revolution where everybody suddenly turns into an astrologer.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's needs to happen, is ever going to it's almost like I use GPS without being a satellite engineer, right? Not everybody has to go to Switzerland, where I think Einstein was, to live in a world that is of relativity. Even you look at some modern debates, like should we have taken COVID vaccine or not, and that there's a political element to it, there's a religious spiritual element to it, there's an aesthetic element to it. And so more what I see us, like, why does this worldview mean so much to me, is because I was suffering under materialism. That's what it was. I ran into a problem where I knew that there was more to life. There was a depth, there was a poetry, there was a spirit that was in me that was not being reflected in the world around me. And through this spiritual journey, and then what I consider to be a scientific discovery for me, coming into Rick and Groff's work, um, I realized that, wow, there is more to life than what I grew up in. And now I see people who purely believe we live in this material world, and it's just very clear that they're kind of stuck there. Because if that's all you think is real, then anything, any intuitive, artistic, creative, spiritual encounter is very quick to negate. And that is a shame, because that is some of the realest things there are. I'm thinking of Ben Shapiro, who says facts are not feelings, or something. What is it he says?
Something like facts don't care about feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think my response to that, which I appreciate, is that feelings are a fact.
Yeah.
The feelings.
That's like quite Whiteheadian in that way.
I mean, it's the feelings are part of the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's where archetypal cosmology comes in, because we study, financial markets with some of this macro psychology thing. And it's interesting to me how you can have the same asset, and I think any investor in Wall Street and anywhere will notice this as well, that you have the same company, the same narrative, the same everything, but the psychological context has changed. Like, you look at WeWork, it's coming out of the 2010s, grow at all costs, let's have a communal work environment, open floor plan, millennial vibe. That's great, everybody's all for it. So what changed? Now suddenly that's not what people want anymore.
Right.
And we can look at the macro factors, the material factors, but isn't it interesting to note that there is also a correlation to an alignment of planets? I almost don't want to say astrological factor, because astrology means so many things to so many people. So we can just, for me, almost like remove that and say, isn't it interesting to note that there's this psychological correlation to the alignment of planets?
Yeah.
that happened at the same time.
Sure. I mean, I think that that's important because most of the time people think of when you say astrology, they're thinking of the zodiac signs, which is not at all what we're doing here. And I think I'm going to push you on that part because I'm not expecting everyone to become an astrologer, but just the way that we live, after the scientific revolution, like there's the sense that math, the role of mathematics and the role that it plays in enabling us to predict things like shooting rockets into space and um, uh, you know calculating things, whatever, to build the buildings, to build the trains and um, uh, synchronizing travel, movement, all of that is because of mathematics, right? That we have to honor because there is a role that science plays in that sense, and it has brought a lot of flourishing to human society. So you're being taught math in school because of the importance that it plays in our world. And so in a similar way, I feel that archetypal cosmology, astrology should be taught in schools, and especially when one is being taught history. That is my sense. So uh, you know I, I really do believe in that. I believe in that vision. I think that it's an important vision to have, because the more we can have people realize the truth of this reality, the faster we can sort of innovate and get to a place maybe that humanity does want to get to. Obviously, there's no destination, but we can continue to innovate and build systems
Yeah.
that are helpful for the world, that we can push evolution forward in a way that is fruitful. And you know one of my classmates, I believe, he just recently committed suicide. And he was 29 years old. And most of us are 29, 30, my classmates, and we're all going through our Saturn return. I'm in my Saturn return. And it's usually Saturn is the archetype of hardship, of constraint, of rigidity, but also wisdom, strength, and fortitude. And so it comes with, it initially does tend to come with all these hardships and pains and struggles, and it's part of our life as humans. As Rick says, we live in Saturn's realm. And so whenever everyone who's around 28 to 31 goes through their Saturn return is going to sort of face, which means that Saturn in the sky is right where Saturn was when you were born. And that's usually considered to be an initiatory period. You're going from your 20s into your 30s, and it's like, okay, I got to figure out my work, my career, my marriage. If you're gonna, maybe you're gonna have kids, maybe someone in your family dies. It's usually a moment in which you're being shaken up. One of the great stories is SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried from FTX. He had his Saturn return just as all of that was collapsing, because he was not living in integrity. And that's what Saturn is asking us, to live in integrity. And when that is not being done, when you're not living in integrity, something is going to shake you up. And so and it doesn't just have to be that, it could be anything. And so for my friend, maybe he was, I don't really know what it was, but if he had known that he was going through his Saturn return, there may have been a chance that he would not have committed suicide, knowing that during that time, many people do tend to attempt suicide, or commit, or actually do succeed in committing suicide. I personally did attempt suicide during my Saturn opposition when I was 15. That's also another tough time. Anytime there's a sort of angular alignment, when you're 7, when you're 15, when you're around 22, 21, and then when you're 29, you're going to have a major Saturn alignment. And I didn't know about astrology then. Maybe if I had known, you know, my 15-year-old self would have been able to just give myself a bit of a hug and seek out help and just say, hey, I'm going through a really tough time and I'm feeling these things, but I know that it's transitory, you know. So there's many cases like this, and I feel compelled to bring this into the world because I feel like it would be really helpful for people to see that these are just patterns that we all go through, and we're being taught something in those moments, that no matter how hard it is, no matter how much you want to end your life, and that is Saturn actually. It's kind of like the Grim Reaper. It does come with that feeling. Even right now in my Saturn return, I've gone through already quite a few tough moments and obviously also good moments, you know, because you're leveling up at the same time. Um, and I have felt moments where I'm like, oh my God, I really want to die. But I realize that that feeling of death is not about my body, my organisms coming to an end. It's my soul, it's my psyche that wants to die. I want to die to myself and I want to be reborn. And so how do you hold that? And those are things that should be taught in school. You know, same as like not being taught financial management. Like how come, you know, these things are so important? We're being taught the wrong things. We're stuck in the age of the industrial revolution, and the whole educational system has to change. And I think that this field, archetypal cosmology, would be a game changer. And so that is where I'm coming from.
Right.
I'm with you that I don't think suddenly everyone will become an astrologer, just the way that not everyone's a physicist, not everyone's a software engineer. With you on that. But I do think that it's important that this be a part of education.
Yeah, it reminds me of like medicine, like having a general sense of how diseases spread, and washing hands and keeping a surgery room clean. I think for the world to have a general awareness that we have psychological gestalts that do evolve in correlation to planetary alignment, just to be aware of that, I think could provide us an opportunity to deepen into the best of a world transit, and also to mitigate against the shadow. And I think what's interesting is what is the best and what is the shadow probably depends a lot on where you're situated. So there's a very individual question there, about how do I be like, so Saturn, Pluto, we have seen tremendous intolerance during those periods. There can be a tribalism, which can turn into uh, xenophobia kind of vibe. But at the same time, it can have a nationalism, a sense of solidarity, right? Even the nationalism itself can be this amazing version of pride in your deep heritage, or it can turn into, you know, negating others as well, right? And so I think just bringing, I guess, a general psychological sophistication,
Mm-hmm.
I think, would benefit society the same way that there's a general modern healthcare medicine awareness. I mean, of course, even that healthcare awareness, modernity can go into Ozempic, and people are just not addressing basic eating and instead shooting themselves full of expensive drugs to lose weight. So that's the shadow of materialism. Okay, I don't know if surely there's people who benefit a lot from that, but I'm just using this as an example, that in the same way astrology can also become an excuse and a cover up for all kinds of shadow.
Sure.
But I think I'm just orienting with you on that point of spreading a general awareness that this is happening. Like, hey, world leaders and people and companies and artists, this transit is about to happen.
Yeah.
Here's what has happened every time in the past. It's not exactly the same, but psychologically there's a resonance.
Yeah.
So just be ready for it. Like a storm is coming, right? There's a weather pattern.
It's a cosmic weather report that one can provide. No, I totally agree that, on a macro level, like, we know that there's a Saturn Pluto alignment coming in 2028, 2027. And so, historically, I mean, the most recent one was COVID, and then there was 9/11, and then there was the 2008 financial crisis, and then there's World War I, World War II. So I mean, like, and but there's also other things that are happening at the same time. Like, the one example I love is the Monterey Bay Aquarium was built during a Saturn Pluto, and it's also about the conservation Saturn of nature Pluto. So there are good things as well. So if we all as a society, whatever political structure is aware of this and really cares about our human community, then we can work towards that. We can say, okay, maybe there's a chance that there could be a war that breaks out. Like, how do we sort of navigate that? How do we prepare for that? Or how do we turn that into something that's a bit more noble,
Yeah.
such as, like, building a Monterey Bay Aquarium or something along those lines. And then, to your other point, I agree with you that we don't want it to be, we don't want astrology and knowing your transits, knowing your aspects in your natal chart to be a way for you to bypass certain things, right? So I have days where I'm like, oh, it's my moon sun square, which can create a sense of imbalance. And I'm like, oh, it's because of that I'm like this. But what I love that you always bring up is the sense that it always comes down to character, no matter what. Because Sam Bankman Fried probably shares the same birthday with a lot of people, and so he's going through the same transit. But it's not the case that that other person who has the same birthday as him did the exact same thing that he did. And maybe so his Saturn return was not as bad as, like, ending up in prison for the rest of your life. So that's an interesting subject, and I think maybe we can get into that another time, about, like, what is beneath that layer of, like, the chart, and why do we think it's character, and where does that character come from.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are all interesting things that I think we can continue to get into. But yeah, if there's anything else you want to share.
Yeah, I think no, that's great.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, it was nice to share a bit about our story, our history, and we'll continue to share more. Um, we're going to be launching a community, and a course soon, so keep a lookout for that. Best way to be in touch is to subscribe to our newsletter, and yeah, just looking forward to sharing more. Thank you for tuning in.